Our topic today is automation, and our special guest is Adam Robinson from DJB. And Adam, we look forward to what you're going to show us and talk about it. There's just so many of these automation systems. Some of them are very expensive, some of them are free. And, the old story, you get what you pay for, but that's not necessarily true. It's important to match the system to what you're doing, isn't it, Adam?
Indeed, it is. And thank you, Barry, for having me. For those of you who are unfamiliar with myself and with the company, I've been in broadcasting for 30 years. I've done everything you can possibly do, from on the air to being the director of engineering for an independent group of radio stations. Throughout my entire career, it has been stitched with automation. I started out excuse me, I started out with a radio station that was an early adopter of the Media Touch system. So I learned a lot about automation out of college and then into my first job. And I've worked with pretty much every system you can possibly imagine. I've been with DJB Radio now for 6 years. I'm the vice president of operations. So when things go wrong, I'm the guy who gets blamed. Um, the company is owned and operated by Ron Paley, who I'm sure many of you know or have heard of. He was truly a trailblazer in broadcast automation back in the 80s when he took a chance on the original Media Touch system. So DJB's full-scale automation company. We have two different tiers of playout and production systems, and we also have a bunch of other bolt-on pieces of software that you've probably heard of, including Radio Spider, our DJB Logger program, and our most recent addition to the family, which is DJB Studio, which is a little kind of micro automation system with a built-in live mixer, and it's great for remotes and sporting events and that kind of thing. So those are the products that we have available. What I'd like to talk to you about today are just some tips and tricks that I've picked up from all of my years of doing this. I know that a lot of people have worked with automation. It's not exactly something new, but I've come across a lot of scenarios in my career where people are not thinking, they're not thinking smart when it comes to automation. There's a little too much reliance on the system itself. And a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of education, and a little bit of forethought going into a system will, make your life a whole lot easier and keep people from calling you in the middle of the night and screaming about the computer. One little funny story, back when I was, the on-call guy for a group of stations early in my career. My wife would sometimes answer the phone. This takes you back to the days before cell phones, when we actually, people called the house, and the phone was on her side of the bed for some reason. And she had taken to answering the phone in the middle of the night, and at 3 a.m. she'd ask, what's the problem? And they say, oh, the computer's not doing this or not doing that. And she says, have you tried rebooting it? And so they would, and then I'd never actually talk to them. She'd tell me the next morning, hey, so and so called, and I told them to reboot the computer. So that seems to be the cure-all for everything. I'm going to pull up my deck now. If I could, I'm hoping, Barry, you're going to let me present. Let's do this. And okay. We don't want Google. We want PowerPoint.
You got it. Now just make it full screen if you want.
Yep. Let me just get this out of the way. There we go. Okay. Is
Got
everybody
it.
seeing? Okay, and we'll get everybody else out of the way. So, some automation principles. I put this presentation together for my local chapter of SBE. I've done a little bit of refining to it. So, if anybody has seen this before, I apologize, but it's a work in progress. So, automation is there to provide 24/7 audio and control. It is the backbone of a radio station. It is the thing that we rely on to keep those radio stations on the air. So, it has to be reliable. There's four key aspects to a system. There's scheduling, there's production, there's logic, and there's playout. A good system should be able to run unattended or with minimal input and maintenance. If you've got a system that needs constant maintenance, that there's, constantly issues with logs failing or audio not playing or problems with, audio quality or whatever, it's time to take a deeper look at the system to figure out why it's not running the way that it should be. It could be a failing hard drive. We've got a customer right now we're working with who all of a sudden in the middle of the night lost his database. And then when he came in the next morning, everything was connected the way it should be, but the system was off the air all night. Well, the problem is that the hard drive's failing, and you didn't know that without looking into some of the logs. So, radio automation doesn't replace people. It should be used as a tool to make content better. That is something that I really stress, and I've stressed throughout my entire career. We're not looking to replace people. We're looking to give them tools to do a better job. Now, those same people have to understand how the system works, and it does what they tell it to do. It's not smart. It is there to be programmed. So you have to teach your staff how it works. And the last thing is the computers work for us, not the other way around. I was actually just on a call before this with one of our customers who was saying that they have a problem child announcer who wants the system to do what he wants it to do. And I said, well, that's just not how it works. So, we have to tell the computers what to do. The computers don't tell us what to do. Choosing the right tools. This is an important part of anything that has to do with radio automation. Many providers, many companies provide an all-in-one solution, but that might not be the best fit for your organization. It's not just about production and playout. Consider all the aspects of automation, from scheduling music and traffic to logging, content retrieval, remote voice tracking, production, and even the logic side of the system. I'm sure there's a lot of engineers on the call here. Which system is going to provide you with the easiest and best path forward to be able to have things automated beyond just playing music IDs and commercials. We're talking about AOIP systems. We're talking about Wheatstone or Axia, SAS, Logitech. There's lots of great systems out there. Which one's going to work the best for you? Search for products that work well with other systems or stand alone. DJB Radio Spider, which is our most popular program, is something that can download and format audio for any automation system. It's our most popular product because it works with everything. It can format the content to be delivered into any of the popular automation systems out there. So look for products that can do that so that you're not necessarily putting all of your eggs in one basket. One size doesn't necessarily fit all. Standardization across a group is great, and we recommend it, but maybe you don't need all the bells and whistles in every market. And maybe you can find a few different tools that work for your budget and also for your operations to have a different playout system in different markets, as long as those things can communicate with each other. And finally, think globally. If you're part of a group or a network, can the system share and deliver content without a great deal of human intervention? Can it share and deliver content with different systems? So, a warning, now the shameless plug for our DJB Zone Wide Area Automation System, which is our new system that we are launched. We've launched this fall. We showed it at NAB. And what we've done is we've put together a package that solves a lot of these problems. So let's just have a quick overview of this with our architecture in mind. You have a bunch of different markets around the country, and you need to be able to not only share content seamlessly between those markets, but you also need to be able to make sure that you've got redundancy and backups in each market. So obviously linking everything together is important. Having hub and spoke systems, this is very popular right now with a lot of systems, a lot of AOIP systems where, they want to centralize everything in one location, but they want to be able to deliver stuff. So when trying to pick an automation system, you want to look for something that has the easiest path forward to be able to deliver content to multiple markets, and something that might be able to talk to other systems. We've specifically designed our new product to be able to do that, where if you are using a competitor's product in a different market, well, we have the ability to be able to take audio content from your system that's running DJB and deliver it formatted to other systems in other markets. So that's it for the sales pitch. Networking. Let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts that go into automation and some of the things that get overlooked sometimes. Early automation systems needed a discrete closed network. We all remember the 4 base T and the 10 base T coax networks. What changed? Why did we suddenly decide that once LAN was standard in offices and studios that any old connection would do? We've got the photocopier and, the guys who were downloading, copious amounts of free illegal movies and music on the same network as our automation system. Gigabit networking is crucial. I know that sounds completely redundant and pedestrian, but the truth is that you may not know that there are still 10-100 resources in play on your network that could be bogging down traffic. Even if they're not a switch device or a network peripheral device that the traffic has to flow through, it could be something as simple as a printer that just by the sake of it being so slow, it's bogging down your network. So check and make sure that you've got 10-100 devices off of the network. Learn lessons from the AOIP systems where multicast audio demands a closed LAN or VLAN and no interaction with other networks. Why not do the same for your broadcast automation system? You're relying on it so heavily to be the backbone of your organization, the thing that's supposed to keep the radio station on the air. Once again, why are we sharing this network with your photocopier and with the receptionist who's watching YouTube all day? When we look externally, fiber optic connections are absolutely king. In any place that you can get fiber, put fiber in. But don't count out cellular. There's a lot of good cellular devices out there that offer private connections. Our friends at Max Connect certainly have cornered the market on that. Cellular is a great backup if you can't get fiber, but try to avoid DSL and cable wherever possible. That's the old days. You may as well put in a 33.6 dial-up modem. VPN, I like to call it a necessary evil, but let the provider deal with security. Don't do this to yourself. There's lots of great software VPNs out there. We use ZeroTier, for instance, and I'm not getting any kickbacks for mentioning them. Let somebody else deal with the security and worry about the encryption and all that sort of stuff. Don't go punching holes in your firewall unnecessarily. Remote contributors, you need to treat them like internal resources. This again speaks to the idea of everything being part of a global community. If they are somebody who's contributing news reports or somebody who's contributing voice tracks or somebody who's contributing logs, put them on your network. Don't treat them as being a separate entity, because that's a great way to have, viruses, malware, that kind of stuff, make it into your system. And finally, what about the outposts? Air gap your transmitter sites, absolutely. And think of them as like a live offsite backup location. That's not to say that you need to completely cut off your transmitter site from the rest of your organization, but find some way to air gap it so that if you have a ransomware attack, which are becoming more and more frequent and are really affecting smaller broadcasters, they're not going after the big guys, or if they are, they're not getting through. But they're going after the smaller broadcasters, and they're really wreaking havoc on those networks. A colleague of mine had that happen where they don't even know where the ransomware virus got in, where it was opened, but it crashed their entire system across 6 markets, including transmitter sites, including a co-location facility, including even their cloud stuff got completely locked down. And if it weren't for the fact that, by some miracle, they had a server that had been in a flood, that had been sitting on the floor in the rack room for 6 months. It had dried out, obviously. They would have lost all their data completely. So, really important to make sure that we keep that in mind, that we're not only, using it as redundancy, but also a chance to air gap. Hardware. Let's talk about hardware. Now, hardware comes and goes. You can see on this slide here, I've got this picture of a bunch of old CRT monitors and all the old white stuff and whatnot. We tend to give value to things that maybe we need to let go of, that sunk cost fallacy. And that's certainly the case with hardware. Servers are servers, workstations are workstations. It's good to know the difference and be able to differentiate between the two. A server is something that you're making an investment in. A workstation is something that you should just plan to replace every few years, or, create a cycle where, today it's an automation piece. Next, the next step forward is it's going off to the sales department. The last step of it is that it's on some desk somewhere where somebody just needs to access the internet, and then it gets cycled out of the building. Favor preferred spec over minimum spec. This is something that people always seem to mix up. Minimum spec is like, okay, it has 4 wheels and a seat, and it'll run down the road. But wouldn't it be nice to have, doors and windows and a motor and a steering wheel? So always look at preferred spec over minimum spec when it comes to making choices in hardware. Don't overinvest. And this goes back to the same sort of concept as the sunk cost fallacy of having machines around for a long time. Hey, our owner comes to us and says, hey, we paid $25,000 for this piece of equipment 15 years ago. You can't tell me you're just going to throw it in a dumpster. Don't overinvest in stuff. Buy extras, especially workstations. They're cheap now. Everything's cheap. Budget and plan for a replacement life cycle. Is similar to what I was talking about in terms of, cycling those machines around the organization before finally sending them out the door. The average workstation should give you 5 to 7 years of service. A server should give you up to 10 years of service, as long as you're using, decent OEM parts. But keep in mind that at some point things are going to start to slow down. I've got a demo machine here in my office that I've been carrying around on the road with me for 5 years. It's gotten to a point now where the fans are running constantly. I'm not asking too much of the machine. There's nothing, there's nothing significant being processed, but because the system is starting to age, it's starting to show its age. So it's important to pay attention to that. Put UPS units on everything. Absolutely everything that can handle a UPS unit or that the UPS unit can handle, not your shop vac. Learned that lesson the hard way a couple of times. Put your UPS units on everything, and that will save you a lot of heartache and a lot of headaches. Yes, they're expensive. Yes, you may say, well, why would I want to invest the money on having a UPS unit on the screen and the second monitor in the voice track studio? Well, because it may save you getting a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Laptops come with built-in UPS units. I know we try to shy away from using laptops as office devices or as some part of a grander network, but the truth is that laptops are probably more powerful machine these days and more versatile machine than most desktops that you're going to find. And they come with built-in UPS, so added bonus. Monitors, keyboards, and mice should also not be overlooked. Don't buy the cheap ones. If you go and buy refurb machines or even some new machines, you're getting these cheap plastic ones that are worth like $7 for a mouse and a keyboard. And the first time somebody hits them too hard, they're going to explode or not work anymore. Buy name brand stuff. Keep that in mind. And monitors as well. Monitors have come down in price. Even touchscreen monitors have gotten relatively inexpensive. So, try to make sure you're making good decisions when you're buying your peripheral devices. So hardware for a basic automation setup, and I apologize again, this is from a deck that I used to promote our zone system. This is a basic setup for a basic operation. You've got a server, you've got a couple of small workstations. These are the mini forums. We're selling a lot of these with DJB to our customers right now. They're inexpensive, they're insanely powerful, and they have a great track record. These ones they're called Minis Forum. You can look them up on Amazon. They range in price from like $600 to about $1,000, depending on what you put in them. You can pack a lot into one of those. We're talking, NVMe drives. We're talking, 32 gigs of RAM. We're talking dual HDMI. We're talking dual network, all the USB ports you can possibly imagine. And it's quiet, it's fanless, and they are just fantastic little machines. And then again, as I mentioned, laptops. Use the laptops for stuff. So in a typical DJB scenario, what we would end up doing is we would have a server that is running the server programs and doing background stuff. That's where the database is. That's where the audio library lives. We have a production machine and an on-air machine that are essentially edge devices. I mean, they're running EXEs, but we're treating them as being, a less significant part of the grand scheme of things. And if you buy machines like these ones, these little cube machines, keep extras on the shelf and just have them ready to be hot swapped, right? I mean, the database and everything on any automation system should be living on the server. It should not be living locally on the on-air or production machines. All you need to do is replace a Windows device that has the EXE there. And then, laptops, they're great for log creation, voice tracking, remotes, any place that somebody needs to work. They want to work from home. They want to work from the car. They want to work from the transmitter site. They want to work from the hockey game. Let them do that using a laptop, and just make sure that those laptops meet your minimum spec. Digital asset management. Now, this is an interesting part of the sort of the history of radio automation, because we've been through so many different formats and we've been through so many different variations on the same theme. And every now and again there's a new audio codec that comes along. Every now and again there's a new way of encoding or compressing audio. But what we're forgetting to do, and this is a big thing, and we deal with this with customers all the time, is people aren't going back and assessing their library. I have a copy of this song and it's just in my library, and it's been through 3 different automation systems, and I don't know where it came from. I mean, it might have come from LimeWire or Napster for all I know. Maybe it was ripped off of a CD and then turned into an MP3 by some early layman coder or something. But the audio quality, and not just the audible quality, but the actual file quality, may be a problem. And we're starting to see a lot of issues where Windows is having a hard time handing files off to the audio device or vice versa. And we're seeing stalls and hangs and audio playback and that kind of stuff because there's a bunch of old formats, there's a bunch of old audio, and we're just getting too many different things. So it's always really good to sort of assess your audio assets, go back and have a look at it. A lot of radio stations have made the conversion from compressed audio to uncompressed audio. They've standardized on one or the other, and they've cleaned up a lot of these problems themselves. But so many different smaller radio stations and smaller groups out there. If you're contract engineers and you're working for your local, house of worship station or a low power FM or a community station or something like that, have a look at the audio library and just get a sense of what's there. There are lots of conversion programs out there on the market that will at least standardize the bit rate and standardize the frequency of compressed audio so that you're not asking the system to constantly be switching back and forward between different sample rates and different encoding frequencies. Compressed versus uncompressed, I mean, this is an argument as old as time itself. Hard drive space is really cheap right now. However, one of the things that we're seeing now is a kind of like a dead stop in this idea of moving everything into uncompressed wave PCM, because now we have to be able to transport this audio to places that we never thought we were going to. When everything was in one building and it was just one system that was just pulling audio off of a server, hey, great, yeah, let's get those. We got cheap hard drive space. Let's get those wave files in there. We're going to make the radio station sound great again because we're not running uncompressed audio. But now we have to be able to share those assets across a wide area and across, 15 different markets, and it takes time to take a 10, a 10 meg MP3 file versus a 70 or 80 meg wave file. Like, it takes time to transfer those audio files. So it's just something to keep in mind. Clean up your audio libraries. We already talked about that. Dead files bog down systems. I can't tell you how many times we go in and do a conversion somewhere and it takes us months because the first problem is they haven't cleaned up their audio library in a decade since the last time they switched automation providers. They've got stuff in there that they don't even know they have in the system. And it's just dead audio. It's just stuff that shouldn't be there. You want to take a backup of it? Fine. Put it on a separate server, put it on a separate drive, take it offline, but don't leave it in your automation system unless it's stuff that you're actually going to play because it just bogs down resources. Our business is audio. We're in the business of providing good quality audio, whether that's radio, whether that's podcasting, whether that's, streaming, whatever the end user listens to. We really need to encourage all of our contributors to strive for quality over convenience. Okay. It's really easy to, just do a podcast using whatever, headset you've got hanging around your wireless earbuds, whatever it is. But what's that going to sound like to the end user? And if you've got people who are doing remote voice tracks, or you've got people who are remote contributors who are, dialing in on a codec into your radio station, they really need to do everything that they possibly can to put their best foot forward to make it sound professional. There are a lot of high quality, low cost microphones on the market now. My favorite is the AT2020 USB. I've been using that one for years. I voice track stations from one end of the country to the other using it. I used to do voice tracks from hotel rooms, from my truck when I was on the road, from any airports, any place that I could find a quiet space to do a voice track. That's a superb microphone. Obviously, I mean, today, if you had a look at my video picture, I'm using, good old fashioned RE20. That just happens to be what I have here on my desk in my office. But it's important to make sure that we're maintaining that quality regardless of what the delivery platform is. Processing. Yeah, processing used to be a big thing. Mic processing, signal processing used to be a huge part of radio back in the 70s and 80s. The whole Boss Jock sound, the Symmetrix 528s that were, run wide open with, all kinds of extra EQ and compression added to them. They made a mouse sound like a lion. We're at a point right now where we really have to stop and consider how much processing is too much processing, because delivery platforms make a huge difference. We are now providing content to not just an AM or an FM or an HD radio chain. We're providing content to podcast distribution places. We're providing to streams. We're providing to high quality and low quality streams. We're providing content to just about any possible listening device you can think of, whether it's earbuds or a full, symphonic system. It's the radio in the car. It's the old 3-inch speaker thing. For those of you who remember, back in the old days when everything was being done on reel-to-reels and carts, we always used to run it through the 3-inch speaker on the final mix. We ran through the 3-inch speaker on the reel-to-reel machine just to make sure that we weren't missing any audio. So when it comes to processing, make sure that again, standardization, that you're not over processing, you're not over compressing the audio, because the delivery platforms really do make a difference. And you also have to think about all the different steps in the chain. You're not just, okay, so I'm talking into a microphone right now that has no processing on it, but it's a dynamic microphone that is being converted to digital through a USB device, which means there's some sort of compression going on there. And then it's being fed to Windows, which is then feeding it to Zoom, which is then compressing it further. So what you're hearing is been stepped on at least twice between my voice and your ear. Not to mention whatever you're receiving it on, and whatever headphone device or speaker that you're listening on, there's going to be some sort of DSP processing there. We have to accept that DSPs exist everywhere now, because that's just the way the world's gone, and that's how we're dealing with things in this digital age. So you want to make sure that you're not adding too much compression up front. And this also takes me back to the concept of and I'm just going to move on here, but the concept of compressed audio versus uncompressed audio. How many different places are you compressing that audio? And compression isn't a bad thing, but it used to be we just used analog compression, and that analog compression was the last thing that it was touched before it hit the air chain, before it hit the transmitter. Now we may be applying analog compression to a microphone, then digital compression through a codec, then digital compression through whatever the streaming service is, then digital compression through whatever the receiving end is. And you see my point. We have to be really careful about processing and making sure that we standardize that as well. Operation of a system. This is a key thing, and this is something that I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation. And I think that this is something that gets overlooked and it gets forgotten, because as engineers, our job is to make sure that the system runs and that the system works. But what does that entail? Our job doesn't end at just getting the system functional and keeping it on the air. We are the ones who know the most about how the system works, the do's and don'ts, the ins and outs, the things that are going to create potential issues down the road. You make too many changes to a log and then try to feed it into the computer, it might crash. You start and stop the audio 50 times, you hit the same button 14 times, something's going to go wrong. But we're the ones who know that, and then we're the ones who have to deal with that. So it's really important to make sure that we drive the bus. We, as the engineers and the technical people, drive the bus to make sure that everybody else who's using the system is not only educated on how the system works, but also takes a bit of ownership in making sure that it runs properly. The first thing is to synchronize everything. Man, oh man. I've spent so many years of my life sitting in meetings talking about trying to get music clocks, traffic clocks, and automation clocks to line up. But it's critical, and it should be something that isn't just done once and then forgotten about. This is something that should happen on a regular basis, because music might make changes to their rotations and how many pieces of audio they schedule in a certain block. Traffic may decide that, we only need 2 minutes of spots this hour instead of 3. Well, that's going to throw things off when it comes to merging it with music. And then there's the automation codes as well, which can also change depending on the programming that you've got on the air. So it's really important that this is a mindful thing. And again, we need to be the ones who sit down with the programming department, the traffic department, the music department, and even the production department and say, okay, guys, we got to make all of this line up, because that's the smoothest way to make an automation system run. Encourage your key staff to meet regularly and discuss issues to solve these problems. You don't necessarily have to be in every one of these meetings, but once you give them the tools and the understanding and the knowledge of how to sit down and work together to make sure that all the clocks line up, and that, a 30-second spot is a 30-second spot. It's not 32. It's not 37. People need to understand the impact of not doing this stuff, on a consistent basis. Engage with everyone. Anyone who touches an automation system is a potential resource and a potential point of failure. This is everybody from, your engineering and IT staff, This is your producers, your music and traffic people that we've talked about, even salespeople may have some influence over the automation system. Everybody has their hands on the automation system, and it's important to make sure that you're treating them as a resource because they can tell you what they do and don't like, or they can tell you if there's a problem, but also they can be a potential point of failure. So this is why training is key. Don't leave anything to chance. We have had automation systems in radio stations now pretty much consistently for the better part of the last 30 years, 25 for sure. This isn't new, and they're not going away. And every automation system does essentially the same thing. You produce audio, you put it into the system, you create a log, you have a playback system, the audio gets played out, you're on the air. Okay. Every automation system is effectively doing the same thing. But what you need to do is you need to make your staff understand that, the people who touch it every day, the people who are working with it every day, they need to know that this isn't magic. Don't leave anything to chance. Teach them. Just sit them down in a boardroom and say, okay, here are the basics. Here's how this works. Demystify it. And cross-training is also an important part of this too, and something that I encourage a lot of our customers to do. If I'm constantly dealing with the same person over and over again, what happens if that person's sick? What happens if that person doesn't make it to work that day? What happens if there's a blizzard or a train wreck or a plane crash or something and that person can't get to their job? No one person should be solely responsible for any part of an automation system or any part of any system. I mean, it's just common sense when you stop and think about it. This is how the world works. You can't just have one person who knows one thing. Let's talk a little bit about redundancy. How much backup is too much backup? This is a question that I ask people a lot. I mentioned earlier we were talking about ransomware and about having offsite backups and air gaps and all that kind of stuff to make sure that you've got a copy of all of your data someplace that's safe in case somebody comes in and, locks down your entire system and then wants $1 million to turn your computers back on. But how much backup is too much backup? You can really create one of those space-time continuum paradoxical loops if you're not careful. You can end up with too many layers of backup, and then you have no idea what's current, where it is, what's kept here, what's kept there. So just be conscious and cognizant of how your backups work. The important things to remember are you don't care about what happened yesterday. You care about what's happening today and what's happening tomorrow. Yes, it's nice to have history files. Yes, it's nice to have access to, traffic logs, program logs, and that sort of stuff. And I'm not suggesting that we ignore those, but the key things that we need right now is what we need to broadcast today, tomorrow, and the next day. Those are the things that should be your primary concern when doing backups. Everything else, back it up once a week, once a month, put it offsite somewhere, tuck it away. Hard drives are cheap. Buy lots of them. Just buy hard drives. Just have a stack of them on the shelf. So if something starts to fail, you can immediately identify it, take it, copy that data from one place to another, new hard drives back on up and running. And by hard drive, I mean SSD or an NVE. We're not in the spinning drive. If you still have spinning drives in your network, I pity you, and I highly recommend you get rid of them as soon as possible because we are getting to a point where they are failing at an alarming rate because most of them are 10, 12, 15 years old. Remember the sunk cost fallacy when it comes to this kind of stuff. If you have a mechanical spinning hard drive, you're like, well, it's a 2 gig hard drive. We probably paid a lot of money for that. We don't really have it in the budget right now to replace it. It's a ticking time bomb and you're really hurting yourself. Not to mention the fact that they're not as fast. The SSD and the NVMe drives are much, much faster than a spinning hard drive. Let's demystify cloud. Okay. This is something that even smart people like us have trouble with because, cloud is this mythical place off in the ether somewhere where data goes to live. The truth of the matter is that cloud is just a word for a server in some other location. It's somebody else's server. It's in somebody else's data center, whether it's, Amazon or Apple or Microsoft. It's just data that lives somewhere else. So let's not get ourselves too bent out of shape about the idea of cloud. Everybody uses offsite. Everybody uses colo. Everybody uses places to house data that isn't in your building. Okay. If you're using Microsoft 365, well, that's cloud. We don't think of it that way, but it is. So it's just the same idea. Make sure that your data is secure no matter where it is, but don't get this idea that somehow cloud is this mythical, magical place, where data goes off to enjoy a better life. It's just another computer in another place. And it's important that we demystify that for everybody in the organization. Okay. Like your general manager, your program director, the guy, I keep seeing all this stuff about all these cloud systems. Well, why don't we have cloud? Well, what do you want to do with it? Like, do you want everything in the cloud so you don't have to have physical brick and mortar? Or do you want us to build our own version of cloud where it's off-site, but we have access to it and we maintain those servers? It's just really important to kind of get your head wrapped around that cloud is just a buzzword. Create single points of failure rather than multiple points. Again, going back to how much backup is too much backup. And this is not just about data. This is about physical devices on a network. I had a conversation with a couple of colleagues of mine at a trade show this year, and we were talking about the idea of, well, I've got my primary broadcast is coming from location A, my secondary broadcast is coming from location B, and it'd be really nice if I had a location C just in case A and B fail, then I can fail over to C. Okay, great. So how are we delivering this content to one point, which is the transmission point? Well, we're going to have a codec here, and this one's going to use this, and this one's going to use this transport mechanism. And once we start, working out how we would build a logic system that would know to be able to switch from A to B to C and then deliver it to, to that central point, there's too many points of failure. Keep it simple. Just make one point of failure, push everything to one device that then pushes it to your last mile distributor, we'll call it, whether it's your transmitter site or it's your streaming provider or, wherever it's going to live in the cloud to do a podcast. Single points of failure are really important because that cuts down on the amount of troubleshooting you have to do. I know it seems like it's oversimplifying it, but it really isn't. You have one piece of audio or one system that's playing audio from one place to another place. Don't add 6 other layers of complication to that. Centralization is great, but what if that's the failure point? How do we make sure that we have good redundancy? One of the things that we do with our DJB zone system is we have a hot standby on air that lives at the transmitter site that's reading the same log, that's following along. And as soon as there's a problem at the studio, either manually or through a contact closure, we start up the standby and the audio switches over, and now the standby is on the air running your log until things are fixed back at the studio. Don't put in multiple points of failure. Don't assume that because you've centralized that that's the end all be all. You still have to have backup somewhere else. Can your audience rely on you to be there in a crisis? And when we go beyond the idea of just data redundancy, and we're talking about the actual physical redundancy of your system, what's going to happen if there's a hurricane? What's going to happen if there's a flood? What's going to happen if there's a massive power outage, a blizzard? Again, a plane crashes into your transmitter site. I mean, like how reliable are you in being able to provide audio? And again, the simple solution to that is right where the audio comes out, whether it's a streaming provider or it's a transmitter site, stick an automation system. Put something there that can provide full content, not just, a backup CD or a playlist of MP3s that's running in your transmitter. Those are great backups. Don't get me wrong. I'm not putting them down, but we need to have a way to do it. Radio stations historically had the ability to broadcast live from the transmitter site. Most of them had little booths, little studio booths, where there was a microphone and at the time, I guess, a telephone and some sort of playback device, whether it was a record player or a cart machine. But there was a way to be able to get back live on the air. Keep that in mind when trying to figure out how you can have your audience rely on you in the time of crisis. Use physical and human resources at hand. Remote contributors, transmitter sites, we mentioned the transmitter sites, but remote contributors can also be a lifeline. Maybe their studio's down. Maybe the internet connection at the studio's down. Maybe the STL's down. Maybe you don't have any way of getting anything in and out of the building, but you've got a guy sitting at home with a microphone and a computer and a codec. Well, make it so that he can connect up to the transmitter site and just broadcast live from his basement. Hey, we're here. We're helping you through this time of crisis. Invite people over, turn it into an open house party, the old John Garabedian show, and just have everybody around the microphone, helping people through a crisis. And don't forget analog. I mean, we talk about digital systems. We're constantly putting in new digital systems. I'm a digital guy. I've worked with all of the AOIP systems. I've worked with all of the automation systems. We're constantly trying to find ways to get more and more digital and with less reliance on old technology. But analog worked for the first 100 years. I mean, a telephone line or an analog STL or even a two-way radio, it works. And the technology is probably lying around. I bet you everybody's got a transmitter site that's just full of old junk like that. Put it in as your last ditch backup. And that way you can truly broadcast from anywhere whenever, crisis hits and everything falls apart. How to assess your needs. So the industry is changing faster than technology can keep up with right now. What we needed last year seems ancient compared to what we need today, let alone tomorrow. As a software developer, but also as a member of the community, I'm seeing this trend towards, everything's got to be centralized. We're rationalizing. There even before the pandemic, there was this push to cut down and reduce the amount of brick and mortar that radio companies and TV companies had, and to be able to to broadcast from anywhere. But with things moving as fast as they are, you need to be able to not only plan for today, but think ahead to tomorrow. So when talking to an automation provider, when talking to any provider, really, find out what they're doing next. Like, what's the next step in development? Okay, this is what you've got today. Where are you guys going next? Because I guarantee you that most of the providers out there can't really answer that question because they don't know, because they are so invested in what they're doing today. Changing that model is a painful topic for them. So try and find companies that are innovating and moving in the right direction. Ask questions. Talk to people in your own organization. Find out what their pain points are. How can we make their lives easier? We have fewer people doing more jobs, and this is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger issue. We've got people who are, doing programming. I've got a friend of mine who does traffic for a network. She does 32 stations. Now, there's some assistance there. There's local people who are taking care of some of the editing and certainly, she's not responsible for the audio content, but she's got 32 stations that she has to be responsible for creating logs for on a daily basis. So, find out how we can make their lives easier and find tools to work with them. The people who use the automation are truly your best guides because you don't know what their issues are. Your program director doesn't know what their issues are. Your general manager doesn't know what their issues are. Find out, work with them. Don't just follow the pack. There's a real trend in this industry to follow one, particular provider or, get yourself in the mindset. I always use the great, Wheatstone versus Axia debate. They're both good systems. They both, do ostensibly the same thing. Everybody has their preferences, but locking yourself in for life to one of those systems is a fool's errand because you may need to be able to use resources from both of them. And, one company may have a solution for this market that doesn't work for the other market. So, shop around, see what's new and emerging. Go to the conferences, go to the trade shows, read Barry's blog, see the things that are new and emerging and coming up, and don't be afraid to take risks. Taking risks is such an important part of this industry. It used to be something that we did all the time. Some new piece of technology came along, some fancy new flashy widget that, was supposed to revolutionize the industry came along, and we tried it out. We gave it a try. We wanted to see what happened. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it failed spectacularly. I know everybody's busy, and I know we don't have the same staffing levels, and we don't have the same time on our hands to be able to, to muck about with things. We want tried, tested, and true solutions. But if we don't take risks, there's not going to be any innovation. Find partners. And this goes beyond just automation again. This is just talking about, dealing with vendors in general. Lots of companies are really happy to take your money and then give you a corporate attitude instead of solutions. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is working with our customers and partnering with our customers to help them through their needs. We spend a lot of time working with our customers. We handhold our customers to make sure that they know that we're taking their issues as seriously as they are. I mean, even myself, I will stay up all night with an engineer to make sure that something that was going wrong with automation at 3 o'clock in the morning, is solved and fixed and identified, and so it doesn't happen again. You need to find people that are in the same position as you or interested in working with you to make sure that your needs are being met and that your problems are being solved quickly. And that's my spiel. And that's a lifetime of automation and some, just some ins and outs and some things that maybe you hadn't considered. I'm not suggesting that, you have to take anything that I've said today as gospel, but, maybe I've thrown a few things out there that'll give you kind of a different way of looking at it, or maybe things that maybe you hadn't considered or maybe you'd missed. If you'd like more information on DJB's line of products, please go to our website or go ahead and shoot me an email, adam@djbradio.com. We have everything from core automation programs to our Radio Spider, which is content retrieval, to Studio, which is our small automation and remote system. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to. And Barry, thank you very much for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's great to be able to talk to people outside of a trade show. It's just nice to be able to just sit casually, everybody in their office, and chew the fat a bit.
Well, that's great, Adam, and I'm glad you're here. I'm sure you're more than willing to let us take some questions, and
Absolutely.
I have a few here for you. One of the things that you started with on one of your first slides, which really resonated to me, is the concept that automation should not replace live. It should help live people to do a better job. And this is something I think that is, because of budgetary issues, has been lost in a lot of places. And you walk into a radio station and there's nobody there. There's nobody there. This studio.
Sadly, it's gotten that way. One of the things that I still have a lot of friends in the industry who were on the air and in that forward-facing capacity, and it's gone from them just being a voice on the air, and that's their primary focus, to having to be a social media guru, and having to post on this site and post on that site, and having to, take information in from so many different sources. It used to be we just talked on the radio, brought people in on the phone, chatted with them, and then, carried on with their lives. Well, now you got to be able to text people and take in, DMs on Instagram, or X before it fell to, the chaos that it is now.
Yeah.
I won't get into that. We're not getting political today. But there's so much more that there's so much more that a host has to do these days, that an automation system is so important to help them with that process. They should not have to worry about what's coming next. They should just be able to push the button and let it run.
Yeah, and let me see if you have a solution here for DJB. I don't mind, tell us what you guys do that's different and interesting. Obviously, with automation, and especially with the pandemic, we have this proliferation of home studios. How hard is it for you to set somebody up in their home studio and meld into the automation? And this is going to be a secondary question to it,
Okay.
because you mentioned air gapping.
Mhm.
And the whole thing. And remember, not just the guy in the control room, but your traffic person, your production people, your GM, they all want to get into the system and look at it at one time or another. And then you have stuff coming in from the outside. Cybersecurity. I know I've raised a cloud of issues here, but talk about it a bit.
Well, the first half of that is, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to maintain proper security when you've got people contributing from all over the place. This is why I mentioned VPNs and letting VPNs be responsible for the security. Now, is that going to stop ransomware or a virus or malware getting into your system? Probably not. But there are so many different layers of security that you can put in between, somebody on the outside and somebody on the inside. For us, it's pretty simple. Give them the tool to do their job and say, these are the rules. You treat this machine like you would one inside the building. Don't be using this for your personal stuff. That's one way to cut down on it. It's never a perfect science. And like everything else, you've got to have people who are smarter than me, who are making sure that there are proper filters and that there are proper things. Two-step authentication is a great way. Like, you can actually get VPNs that have two-step authentication that create that local encryption. And if they scan something and see something that isn't right, they'll shut down that connection almost immediately before it gets into your system. So, good to do your homework on that and research that. And again, I leave that to the cybersecurity experts to answer. But in most organizations these days, there's antivirus and anti-malware protection beyond just Windows Defender. And for the most part, it does a pretty good job. When ransomware gets into your system, you have no idea where it came from. It might not even be something that was from somebody opening an email. It could be something that was, part of an IP storm or something that got delivered to an FTP site that you didn't even know was vulnerable. So it's a crapshoot like it always has been.
So you mentioned security. You mentioned let the vendor take care of this. What do you do to help your customers secure those home studios and outlying inputs?
We don't put them in a position where they're punching holes in a firewall. That's why we're using the VPN. And the VPN is the most secure thing that we can possibly provide them. And in terms of local security, I mean, a lot of it just has to do with teaching the person, what can happen if something goes wrong, but also be able to, create, I mean, this is where we get into network structure, and something that I actually dumped out of this presentation from the last time I did it because I spent too long on it and had way too many questions about it that might have
Well,
been
we can
over
have
my
you come
head.
back another time. VPN, you don't want them to use the free VPNs.
Well, I mean, there's different levels of free VPNs. Like I say, I'm a big fan of zero tier, and it's free up to 25 connections, and it's very secure. And we use it with a lot of our customers, and we don't have any issues with it. I think it just again comes down to, trying to convince people and trying to educate people to be a little bit smarter than just, if they see a big red flashing button on their computer to press it. Security is available in so many different forms in so many different places right now, as long as you try to help them maintain their workflow a little bit so that they're not, wandering all over the internet, potentially finding their ways into places that they shouldn't be. You can keep things pretty secure.
I've got some more questions, but I'll let our folks, if you want to raise a question, alternate A or your space bar will unmute you.
We have a whole bunch of questions in the message chat
I
here.
was about just to get to that, or raise your hand. There's another thing you can do, and if you raise your hand, we'll see it and we'll call on you. Um, Brian,
Thank you for all the kind words, everybody who's our customers who are on the call here today. Yeah, we really pride ourselves in responding quickly and doing everything that we can to help you guys get up and running. When you guys are down, we're down. And we, the people who work for our company are dedicated professionals, industry professionals like you and me, who have a lot of experience with getting those phone calls at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're the ones responsible for getting it back up and running. John Cooper asked, "What's the difference between zone and wide area?" Essentially, what we've done is we've redesigned the software with a bunch of tools built into it that allow for a greater collaboration between markets, the ability to easily and effectively share audio assets, logs, and that sort of thing. In terms of the file structures and that aspect of it, it's very similar to what you have now. It's just a different way of transporting and delivering audio. We're relying more heavily on products like Courier and Spider to be able to move those assets around and share things in between different markets. So, John, if you want to learn more about that, give me a shout when you get a chance, and I'll give you a walkthrough of the new software. We get backup software. What do we recommend? In terms of doing, just a regular backup, I'm a big fan of using SyncBack, just for its ability to be able to schedule, manage, and retry. I find a lot of the backup softwares fail on that retry thing. I use SyncBack pretty much everywhere. We use SyncBack to synchronize customer sites and servers and that kind of thing. If you're looking for imaging software, I mean, Macrium is really still the industry leader on that. I would recommend them, but there's lots of other, freeware or low payware on the internet that'll take care of that. Be careful what you load onto a server. Yeah. The servers should be servers, and their only job should be, SQL and slinging audio around. But most and certainly in our case, I mean, our resource load on a server is very light. So if you wanted to throw something like SyncBack on there to be able to take a copy of your data, we recommend that. We have built-in tools to be able to copy your SQL files and move them to a different location so that you've got that redundancy built in there. Um,
You mentioned the cloud, and one of the early comments was when the power in the internet goes down, the cloud goes down. Um, you mentioned cloud in the sense of having a cloud locally as opposed to one in the ether somewhere. Uh, Talk about that for a moment, would you?
I think again, and this goes to that point of demystifying cloud a little bit. What are you trying to accomplish by having a cloud server? The easy answer to that question is I don't want to be responsible for maintaining the hardware, and I don't want to be responsible for maintaining the physical environment around the hardware. I understand that. But you also have to take into account, which is the point that the whoever it was that made that comment is that yes, internet connections fail and you can lose access to the cloud. It's not as frequent as it used to be, but this is why I truly recommend not putting all of your eggs in one basket. Use cloud for backup, use cloud for serving stuff. There are automation providers out there right now who are doing primarily cloud-based content delivery. You log into a cloud-based server to do that kind of stuff. It's just Amazon, right? I mean, and again, it's no different than having a box in your own building that you're logging into remotely and doing the same thing. It's just when you lose connection to that cloud-based server, or if something goes wrong, you're relying on a third-party provider to put it back together. You're relying on a third-party provider to restore that connection and do it in a timely fashion. I wrote an article 100 years ago in Radio World about, about the idea of cloud and where we were back then. And things really haven't changed significantly since then. I mean, obviously the technology's gotten a little bit faster and there are definitely more cloud providers out there. But, the question that I posed in that article, or at least the statement that I made, was that if it takes an extra couple of seconds for a piece of audio to buffer when you're trying to, watch it on YouTube, or you're listening to it on Spotify or Pandora, you don't really care. It just takes as long as it takes. But that doesn't work for broadcast, because even though everybody is conditioned to this idea of things being on demand and taking time to buffer and taking time to actually stream to your device, radio is still supposed to be there 100% of the time. And God forbid we're silent for 2 seconds, they're going to go somewhere else. So, that's kind of one of the big things about relying on cloud. So, multiple points of redundancy. Again, in our new wide area product, we've built in the ability to be able to have failovers so that you can have one centralized location that has copies of your server state of all of your different satellite markets. And in the event of a failure locally, you can connect back to that primary server, which could be a cloud server, which could be in a TOC, a colo facility, something like that. But also a local backup as well. And our on-air system has a system built into it called Heartbeat that just has a copy of the audio locally. In the event of any network loss, it fails over immediately to it and keeps running.
Well, that raises a very good question. Um, with all these features, has DJB become an expensive proposition with a yearly maintenance fee that some of the bigger and more well-known automation systems run, or are you something that would be a good fit for an LPFM station or a standalone mom pop operation?
We're very cognizant of the market forces, and we're well aware of all the other options out there. We also happen to know that there are certain very popular automation providers who are becoming they're kind of pricing themselves out of the market a little bit. So one of the things again that we do at DJB is we don't have a set price list. We do have different tiers of product that we offer. We have two different tiers of automation. And we can provide you with a pricing model that's both flexible and fits whatever budget you need. That's not to say that you're going to pay 3 times as much as the next guy because you happen to have 3 times as much money, but we really, really like to try and help people solve problems. So, hey, you want to buy out and you want to pay for a few years of support ahead of time, fine. We do have that traditional model. You want a subscription where it's a monthly or a quarterly payment, we can do that for you too. We're very flexible about that.
So the key would be for someone to give you a call and discuss what their needs are and the correct product that would fit that.
Absolutely. I mean, hey, listen, one of the things that the pandemic provided us was sort of a kick in the butt to, to start doing things virtually with customers. So if you want to see the software and you want to see it all in its glory, you don't have to come to a trade show. You don't have to come to NAB. Just give us a call, schedule a demo. We'll spend an hour with you. We'll show you all the ins and outs. We'll answer those questions. We'll even talk to you about how we can, make the software work for your particular needs or your particular environment. So all you got to do is just reach out and we'll take care of your needs.
Okay. Any other questions, friends? Anyone have something they'd like to ask Adam or comment about automation in general? I see a couple more questions have popped up here in chat. I think the IGM 770 and the Schaefer
I was going to say there might be some tongue-in-cheek questions in there. I mean, if you really needed to, a GPIO is a GPIO.
That's incredible.
So, yeah, this is Pierre in Northwest Alaska. So, are we going to have an automation AI system?
Well, I guess, it depends on what you want AI to do. AI again is only as smart as what humans tell it to do. I think that's going to be the next thing. I got to stop talking about cloud and start demystifying AI a little bit. But I mean, look, AI to do what? I mean, if the system already has a scheduling program built into it, that's already AI. Because it's using algorithms to predict what, song it should or shouldn't play or a list of things that it should put together. Are we talking AI in terms of AI voices? Well, there's lots of options out there. Not to give away any trade secrets, but we are working on a partnership right now with an AI provider who would give us the ability to be able to do, AI voices for certain aspects of the log. Is AI going to replace humans in radio? You tell me. It's funny you bring that up. I'm obviously a voice guy. I've done a lot of voiceover work throughout my career, and I, for the first time, actually recognized an AI voice on a car commercial during a football game a couple of weeks ago, and I was just flabbergasted. And I'm like, well, I guess that's that. I guess we finally got to the point where that's going to start happening. But can we use AI as a tool as opposed to a means of replacing human beings? And I think that's the thing that we have to be a little smart about. There are a lot of small radio stations, and you said you're in Alaska. There are a lot of places out there that can't either find staff, afford to keep staff, or even have facilities for staff to work. So does it make sense to use an AI voice to tell people what the weather is, or that there's a forest fire about to burn their town down, or that, there's something there that is creating that kind of live and local feel? To me, I see that as being a strength. I see that as something that augments what we do, but it doesn't replace the human beings that would otherwise be doing that job.
Yeah,
Well,
I can kind of tell you that through the years, managers view automation as a way to get rid of people to save money. Announcers view automation that it's going to take their job and don't want to learn it. I keep telling them both. It's not a human, and it's not going to take your job away. Learn it and make a better show.
Hey, you know what, Pierre? Listen, as an 18-year-old kid in college, when I got faced with my first automation system, at the time, I thought, oh, cool. We don't have to manually, because I'd been volunteering for a couple of years at our local top 40 station that was all carts. There were 32 cart machines lined up across a 40 channel console. You had to roll back and forward to to service them. And I thought, hey, this is awesome. And it turns out that because I embraced that technology, I've always had a job because I'm not afraid of it and I understand how it works. And I think
what year was that?
That would have been 1993.
Okay.
Yeah. So a long time
You're
ago.
a child.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, automation.
What are you talking about? These days, I'm one of the old guys.
Well, yeah, just think of how far we've come. Well, there's these guys, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these guys over the next 2 weeks because the turkey fly is coming. One of the first places that that
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
there. Oh, you answered the question. Okay.
You're not going to beat me on WKRP trivia.
Hey, we could, maybe you should be with us on Thanksgiving Day because that's when we're really going to hit it hard.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I'll be there.
um, One of the things that I remember very clearly, and I worked with some of the early automation systems and live assist stuff and partial stuff, and I even worked with one system where the owner tried to jam three stations worth of audio onto one hard drive, and then the next thing I learned was they had hard coded the admin password into the application, and one of the weekend guys knew it and destroyed the whole automation system.
Well done. Well done. I'll go you one better. The first time that I was ever live on the air, at my first real job in radio, doing a real like jock shift. I'd done some news reports and that kind of stuff before, but this was the first shift I'd ever done. It was because our 2 GB hard drive in our automation system had failed, and we had to scramble around, and everybody had to bring their crates of CDs in. Fortunately, we had a whole bunch of wedding DJs who were on the air at the time, and we managed to piece the station together manually that Thanksgiving weekend. And of course, it was 5 o'clock on Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, when the damn thing went down. So, yeah. So, like I say, there are lots of horror stories about about early automation systems failing, and there's horror stories about current automation systems failing. But these days, there's no excuse not to have good backup.
Yeah, but you're just a young guy. The mention was made of the IGM and the Schaefer systems, and they used to operate as I'm sure you're aware. You'd wipe off the oxide, and the system was supposed to count the number of cuts on a particular reel of tape and set the right one up until it miscounted and got to the end, and then you'd have a whole floor full of pieces of tape the next morning.
Boy, can I tell you stories about that?
Yeah, well, at XTRA, we had the spotter system, which is what you're talking about. And our engineers actually, since Schaefer was no longer making the tapes, we had to make our own. So we had an engineer sitting there with alcohol and
Oh, I bet you there was alcohol involved.
well, this was a different kind of alcohol. And, making, clearing the oxide out of every, let's say, 90 seconds of tape. The first thing I did was to install carts to replace them.
Yes, and we had a KTAR, we had a carousel, and it got stuck, and it played the ID over and over and over and over again.
Yeah,
One night,
until the tape snapped.
no, the cops showed up to find out if somebody had died on the ship.
I'm glad I missed all those old automation systems.
Well, that first radio. Somebody's just put up a picture.
Thank you, Ed.
Ed's
Yeah.
just put a picture of the cart carousel up there. That first station that I worked at had tried to go without a console and had set up the whole automation system on an old Ramco 64 channel switcher, and it was a disaster. And one of the first things that I did, despite my being there as the automation whiz kid, was to figure out how to quickly put a McCurdy console back into place, so that the announcers had on-off buttons and pots to work with again. So, automation, again, it's a trial and error thing, and that's why I encourage everybody, to take risks, because sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. You got to be able to come back from those failures.
I wanted to throw in two comments here. I actually started with the Schaefer 800T, at least it had transistors in it. That was back in 1977. So radio automation goes back much more than 25 years. I can, computer-based ones based on a hard drive started around 2000. I'll go with that. But the comment I wanted to make was, first of all, dealing with cloud when you have to talk to a station management about it, it's basically always in their lingo, it's an OpEx versus a CapEx decision. Our computer or their computer, but the concept we only have to build one system in the cloud and it's accessible from everywhere and it will always work is
Well, I tell you what,
it's
I'll
old
happily lease
fallacy.
you the computer for the cost of cloud.
But I wanted the other comment I want to make was at least back in the days when we were doing this, computers, as all of us know, are not built to last like broadcast or consoles are built to last. So we used to basically budget the thing, servers and storage and whatnot on a 3-year cycle. And then hopefully within 3 to 5 years, the station management would recognize the fact we keep asking for replacements. There must be something to this. So we went with a shorter cycle, starting to plan replacements at 3-year intervals. And like I said, hoping to get budget to do it at a 5-year interval. I'll tell you, external storage systems, if you go past 6 years, even on a NetApp system or something else, the technology has changed to the point where the people who built it won't really support you anymore because they have moved on to something much greater and whatnot. So in terms of budgeting cycles and whatnot.
And that's something that, it's a sticky point sometimes for some of our customers where they buy a system and we have an annual support contract with them, where they pay a reasonable amount of money annually. Our annual support for our radio product, which is our lower tier automation system, is $750 a year, which I don't think is exorbitant. But that also includes any updates to the software, bug fixes, that kind of stuff. And when people come to me and say, why should I keep paying this? We never call you guys. It's like, well, because if you don't, and 5 years from now you come back to me and say, I need to replace my computers and I need to replace my software, I'm going to charge you a heck of a lot more than $750 a year to do that. So, it's just a matter of, finding a system that works, but also being cognizant of the fact that, like you say, we're not dealing with analog consoles anymore. We're not dealing with analog pieces of equipment anymore that were built to last for 20 years or 30 years. And some of them, some of them lasted for 40 years because nobody bothered replacing them. We're dealing with a very short life cycle, not just in terms of the hardware, but also in terms of the software. I mean, hey, listen, Windows changes their operating system and everybody has to get on board. It's just the way it is. Windows 10 is about to be out of support as of next year. I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft doesn't extend that again, because much like when XP hit its end of life, there are so many devices out there on 10. There's so many devices on 10 that are running things that we don't think of. I'm sure, I don't know if anybody's had this experience. I've seen it a few times where I'm walking through an airport and there's a big giant video wall that's got a blue screen of death on it, that's still running like Windows 7 or even a few years ago was still running XP. So, but technology changes and there are updates and there are reasons for continuing to move forward with a piece of software and not just say, okay, we put this system in today and 15 years from now, we'll deal with it.
How about the station that has got, let's say they got your system and it's been running for 3, 4, 5 years. And the tech says, we should probably get some new hardware in here. How hard is it to transfer everything over to the new machine?
Shouldn't be difficult at all. I mean, honestly, I can transfer an entire radio station from one server to another or get on-air systems back up and running within an hour. It really shouldn't take that long. And the system is not that complex. I mean, essentially, you're working with a database, in our case, which is a PostgreSQL database. We're dealing with an audio library. And then we're dealing with EXEs on a few computers that need to be mapped. The machines need to be mapped and the drives need to be mapped and the software needs to be mapped and you're back up and running really quick. So you shouldn't be afraid of doing those kinds of upgrades. And if your automation provider is worth their salt, they should have time to be able to help you through that. So you're not just kind of on your own trying to do it. One of the things that I see a lot with some of our customers who don't pay for support is they try to do these upgrades on their own. They try to make changes on their own. We had one guy, I mean, like we had a previous version of the software and a new version of the software had been released. He wasn't a paid support customer. He had a friend who had a copy of the installers, so he just went ahead and installed them thinking he was going to get himself a free upgrade. And guess what? There was a database change in there. So it completely wiped out his databases, and he had to call us and, tail between his legs and credit card in hand, to have us come fix it. So it's always a good idea to work with your providers to do upgrades and that kind of thing, because you don't know what's happened behind the scenes from one version to the next. And if you maintain your support contract and you stay up to date and you work with the company, then they'll work with you to make sure that it's a smooth transition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions, folks, that you'd like to raise for Adam?
I have an odd question from a coworker who has a background in
Asking for a
radio.
friend?
Yeah, asking for a friend. No, Scott has been in using automation for radio for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. But he's out of master control in TV. And his question is, why is it in TV you can get an absolute, multiple sources will give you exactly a 30-minute and 20-second, program. But in radio automation, they don't take into account the crossfades and step-ons and things like that. So you get essentially a error in the amount of time that you get out of a given sequence. That
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense?
I guess I understand what you're saying, because I think the quick answer is that in video, there's video from the start of the file to the end of the
Right.
file. In audio, there's audio from the start of the file to the end of the file, but it may fade in and fade out.
Right, but doesn't the database contain an ability to see, I'm stepping on the next song at minus 12 dB or whatever it's set up to do. Can't it figure that out?
Well, it depends on the automation system. Like, for instance, our system looks at the segue marker for the log timing. It doesn't look at the file length, because the file length could be 15 seconds longer than the segue marker.
Correct.
So our system looks at three markers when it's trying to time out a system. It looks at what we call BOF, or beginning of file. It looks at the segue marker, and it looks at EOF for the end of the file. And from the standpoint of timing, it's looking at the BOF and the segue. But it also has to take into account the audio after that, because it depending on how the system's programmed, it may put a custom fade on it. So we have a feature where you can fade on segue, so that you don't end up with 14 seconds of a tail of the previous song running underneath the next element that you're playing. Here's the thing. If you are getting proper network programming in radio, 30 seconds is actually 29:30. Or 29:50, depending on the provider. Everybody knows that that's the standard. And if you do a good job of producing that file, you're not going to have a segue marker at 27 seconds. You're going to have a segue marker at the 29:50 or whatever it is. It's the responsibility of the people who are putting the audio together to make sure that it's done for network timing. And again, in terms of being able to time out a network show, you need to be looking at those segue times, so exactly, plus or minus a second, when that file is going to start and when that file is going to end.
So you have markers that you can put in when you're programming the songs, as opposed to letting the automation trip the next system when it detects at minus 12 or 17 or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, in our automation system, and I know this is the case for a lot of the other ones on the market, it's not doing that manually every time. Not manually, but you know what I mean. It's not segueing on an audio level. There is actually a set marker on the file, so you know exactly how long that piece of audio is going to play for.
A lot of that depends too on the quality of the production room, and between putting these markers in the wrong place or being very sloppy about audio levels, automation can sound pretty bad, or it can sound very good.
When I was an operations manager, and for a brief period of time, I was wearing both the operations hat and the engineering hat. I would go around and I would smack producers around about making sure that their files were the right length. I don't care, hey, just because it's running on our automation system and nobody else cares. Well, no, 30 seconds is 30 seconds, 60 seconds is 60 seconds. It's not, 62, 63, 37, get it right and take some, take some care and take some pride in what you're doing.
Yeah,
I
I've seen 30 at 52 seconds.
I can't remember seeing any system that would trigger the next event on an audio level.
One of our programs does, our DJB Studio. When you put it into automation mode, it actually reads the audio level and triggers it that way. And I know there's a couple of the less expensive systems out there that do the same thing.
So Adam, does that mean that one of your systems that you have the markers on, can you go ahead and program up a sequence of songs and whatever's going on and get a true time out of it?
No, that system is
No,
not
okay.
designed for doing that. That system's designed for, a college station or an internet station or somebody who's not really too concerned about exact timing. It just needs to run. And it just cuts down on the amount of work that has to go in, because then way you can just throw the files into the system and you don't actually have to produce them. They can just live there and the system will automatically detect a segue.
But what do you
Okay,
do
so
if there's a soft spot in the middle of the music? In the middle of
The algorithm is smart enough to know to look to the end of the file as opposed to looking in the middle of the file.
Good. Just
So
want to
there-
make sure.
So there isn't really a system where you could go ahead and program it up and go, I know this is going to be a 59:30 show. That doesn't exist out there.
Well, no, it does. I don't know that I can give you, 59:30 in plus or minus a couple of seconds, but
That's adequate though.
Network timing is network timing. I mean, one of the things that our system was built to do a million years ago, and part of the core engine of the system that we continue to use today is designed for network. It's designed for satellite. It's designed for having the smarts to be able to make sure that you have the tools you need to be able to time out perfectly to be able to hit those breaks. And we have a lot of customers who use us for satellite fed stuff because it's just so accurate.
Well, one of the real problems, and I had this at ABC and at the WOR radio network. Many stations would call and say, at the end of a break, they wanted us to go into the next segment with music, not voice. So that would give them a few extra seconds to run over time in their local break. And we just had to do it.
Well, I mean, I go back to the days of taking satellite baseball programming, and 25 and 35 hertz tones that were firing elements, and it wasn't always perfect, but nobody complained unless a tone got missed and things got out of sequence. I think there has to be a bit of give and take when you're doing satellite programming. It's never going to be perfect, and it's always going to be a little bit sloppy. It's just the nature of the beast. We're starting to see now a trend towards a more IP-based delivery system. We haven't quite come up with a UDP standard for this yet, but it won't be long before satellite providers are delivering content via IP and sending those triggers via IP, which should help, clean up some of those disparities in timing a little bit, and make it so that we can be a little more exacting.
Well, Adam, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And I'm not going to chase you away. You're welcome to hang on. But at the same time, if you do need to go, I just want to make sure that we have thanked you properly.
Well, I appreciate that, Barry. And there's one last thing that I just want to throw in here, and I probably should have added this to my presentation, and maybe I will for future use. One of the big issues that we run into right now with customers, big and small, is a lack of engineering or IT support on site. There's a lot of contract engineering out there. There's a lot of places that try to get by without an engineer. Oh, we've got a guy who knows computers. Oh, this guy's pretty smart. There needs to be a site champion for an automation system, no matter what. Doesn't matter if it's our automation system or somebody else's automation system. The biggest complaint that we get is, your system it's not working properly. Well, what do you mean it's not working properly? Well, you guys set it up for us and now it's not, it's not firing this, or it's not doing that, or it's doing this wrong. And, we have to say to them, listen, like, it's not our job, even though you're paying us a support contract, it's not our job to run your radio station for you. Like, you gotta find somebody who knows how the system works. And that's a real frustration point for us as providers, is that people just aren't taking the time to actually learn how to, and taking an investment in the system. Every automation system has its flaws. Even the biggest, most expensive ones on the market are riddled with problems if you don't run them properly and you don't understand how they work. So it's really important to make sure that there is somebody on site whose primary responsibility is learning the system and how to operate it.
And
I leave you with that.
what do you normally suggest, that they read the manual, or come visit you, or have someone from your shop visit them?
I can do any of those things, but if people aren't prepared to invest in the time and the energy to make a system work, the system's not going to work.
No,
and I mean, we've had customers, and it happens. It doesn't matter what provider it is. The customers will throw their hands up in the air and storm off and go someplace else, and then say really bad things about us on the internet. Well, the fact of the matter is, we gave that customer just as much and great and helpful support as we did anybody else, but they didn't want to listen, they didn't want to learn, and they didn't assign somebody to the task of making the system work.
sure,
And
exactly.
it frustrates me. It frustrates me when people will threaten to go somewhere else because they've heard that system's better. Well, okay, are you going to take the time to learn how to use it? Is there somebody that you're working with who has taken the time to learn how to use it? Few of the people that were on the call today, like John Cooper, for instance, is a very dear friend of ours, and he took the time to learn how to use the system. And sometimes I rely on him to help support other customers. So it's just a matter of give and take. You can't just put an automation system in and expect it to work, or expect the automation company to be responsible for running it for you.
I have seen stations do exactly that they threw it in and didn't even bother to have on-site tech. And I know for a fact one station where the morning jock called for support at least twice every day for several months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And usually because of operator error, because of
Yep.
and I'm not being a smarmy
No.
prick about this, guys. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are just ways to run a system that, once you figure them out, it works just fine. But if you don't take the time and you just expect it to do exactly what you want, the system needs to bend to you, not the other way around. That's where you run into some problems. So
Sure.
anyhow, on that note, Barry and everybody, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I look forward to the WKRP turkey drop Thanksgiving show. And again, if anybody wants to talk automation, or just wants to shoot the shit about radio, go ahead and reach out to me, email, or you can reach us at our good old phone number at 702-487-3336.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you,
Take care,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.